Good afternoon, Professor Shoup, and thank you for joining us in Hong Kong. I hope you're well.
Well, thank you for inviting me to Hong Kong. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm glad that I don't have to spend 12 hours in an airplane to get there.
Yes, nobody wants to sit on a plane right now. So, anyway, we're very happy to talk to you online. So, let's talk parking. Now, Hong Kong can't be the only city in the world with a parking problem.
Around the world, parking policies are often considered unsuccessful because they are unsuccessful. The basic goal of a parking policy is to prevent chaos. And able to do even this basic function is to prevent chaos. Often in many Asian cities, you see pictures of cars parked on the sidewalks and obstructing pedestrians. And it's just a mess because the parking is free and almost uncontrolled.
In your book, The High Cost of Free Parking, it's something of a Bible in parking circles. You outline three main policies that cities could take to address their parking problems. Perhaps you could just outline those for us.
Uh, to summarize an 800-page book in three bullet points, there are three policies I recommend. The first is to charge the right price for curb parking. And by right price, I mean the lowest price the city can charge and still have one or two open spaces available on the block. The second policy is to make the first policy popular, and that is to spend the meter revenue for added public services on the metered streets, such as to clean the sidewalks and repair the sidewalks and remove graffiti, so that the meter money doesn't disappear into the general fund. It comes right back to help the neighborhood. And then the third policy I recommend is to remove off-street parking requirements. And of course, removing off-street parking requirements doesn't mean removing off-street parking. It just says that the parking will be a choice and not a mandate from the government.
Yes. How does a city begin to implement these policies?
To do that, the city has to be able to measure the occupancy rate of of each block all day long, and the technology is already here and it's readily available. If no spaces are open, if all the spaces are full, the price is too low. If half the spaces are open, the price is too high. So cities can adjust prices to leave one or two open spaces on every block all the time. Uh, and then I think the key thing in getting the price right is another technology issue, is having meters that can charge different prices at different times of day, and the price can be changed remotely. In San Francisco, for example, there are special events, like athletic events or concerts or parades. And in those areas, the price can go up to $18 an hour because that's what the private operators charge. And if the meters don't charge $18 an hour, there will be people driving around and around and around hunting for an open space. So I think if you get the technology right with the measuring occupancy and adjusting prices, the price of parking will settle down to the area where you have one or two open spaces. And sometimes there'll be no open spaces on a block, but if you could park in the next block, that's a good substitute.
Is this something that's applicable in Hong Kong or even China? I mean, our economic models are so different to what you have in the USA. Is this something we should even be looking at?
I haven't been to Hong Kong, but I have been to China, and I'm an honorary professor at the Beijing Transportation Research Institute. So I know a little bit about parking in China. And my two books on parking have been translated into Chinese, and they're going to be published later this year. So I think that once these ideas are available in Chinese, that I hope that many cities will understand that in a very dense area, it makes a lot of sense to charge fair market prices for on-street parking and spend the revenue on added public services on the metered streets. And in a dense area like Hong Kong, the percentage of the residents who can park on the street is a very small percentage of the total residents. Say in Manhattan, which would be our only real equivalent, the neighborhood I measured had enough curb parking spaces for only 5% of the residents. So it would be these 5% who own cars and who don't park off street who would be paying for all of the revenue, and 100% of the residents would get the benefit of all the public services.
One big problem we have in Hong Kong is that parking is not supposed to be free, but there's just rampant illegal parking, very rarely enforced. And so parking is not just free, but it's very plentiful because people just park wherever they want to. How could we begin to solve that?
Now, to make this work well, you have to enforce the parking laws. You have to enforce that people pay for parking. And in some cities, there's very lax enforcement. And people don't expect to get tickets. And if they do get a ticket, they say, why me? It seems so unfair that if a lot of other people haven't been getting tickets, why should I get one? Well, I think that once the city gets the meter revenue, the residents of the stakeholders understand that if somebody parks without paying, they're stealing money from the neighborhood. If this money pays for added public services that the neighborhood wants, I can't predict what a neighborhood in Hong Kong would want, but I think if you ask the residents what is their highest priority, and you spend the money on that priority, then parking without paying will not be a victimless crime.
And do you have any examples of where sort of they've had an enforcement problem and then that's been solved?
What happened in London once, the 1950s, they had meters, but there was a widespread violation. There was so much violation that there weren't enough staff to hand out tickets, and it was uncommon to get a ticket. So then they started using the Denver boot, which is this, you probably have them, but they immobilized one of the tires with a big yellow lock on it. And the purpose is not just to punish the person who wasn't paying, but it's also to show people that could happen to you if you don't pay. So quickly, London switched from very low compliance to very high compliance at the parking meters.
We've got some government people in the audience here, and perhaps they think, parking is a very humble or minor problem. What are some of the consequences of not getting this right?
Well, if cities don't charge the right price for parking, if they leave it free or underpriced, the problem that results is cruising for parking. People have to drive around hunting for a parking space, hoping to see a car leaving or hoping to find a space that is vacant. And this adds a lot to the traffic congestion and air pollution. And of course, now we have to worry about global warming. So I think one of the biggest benefits of charging the right price for curb parking is to eliminate this driving around hunting for a parking space. If you see one or two open spaces on every block, there's no point in driving around hunting for a parking space. There's one right on the block where you want to go.
And just one last question we have time for on parking minimums, which is something, of course, you suggest abolishing. We're going backwards in Hong Kong. We have a new mandate from the government to actually increase parking minimums in new buildings. So, I mean, what would you say to our government about that?
The more general complaint that I made about planning is that we don't get parking wrong, we get everything else wrong.
I've never heard anybody able to explain how they set the parking requirements in their city. It's something that is done by planners because they have to when they're ordered to by the politicians. but the planners are just winging it. They do not know how many parking spaces a barber shop should have, or a nail salon, or a swimming pool, or a badminton court, but cities have parking requirements for all these uses.
Okay, Professor Shoup, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can catch up with you again soon. Thank you very much.